So we left off at the idea of the religious institutions, the priestly institutions being superseded or controlled or subjugated by mercantile institutions. And without going back and reviewing the video I just made before I was rudely interrupted, essentially my point was that William Irwin Thompson has come up with this idea, or I don't know if he originated it or if he just synthesized it and promoted it. But I'm hearing about this idea from him on the left, not from neo-reactionaries. Neo-reactionaries have their own version of neo-medievalism, which is positive. But William Irwin Thompson comes at it, again, from this negative angle. And I always think it's interesting to view two. So the neo-reactionaries are saying neo-medievalism is great. William Irwin Thompson is saying neo-medievalism is a drag. And so I always find it interesting to look at two groups of people who are indicating that the same phenomenon is happening or will happen, and one is coming at it enthusiastically, the other one is coming at it pessimistically. That's always interesting to me. So William Irwin Thompson is talking about neo-medievalism and the idea that the intellectual, by which I think he means the priest class, because I think there is the intelligent work of the warrior, the intelligent work of the merchant, then there's the intelligent work of the priest. So I think when he refers to the intellectuals, the intellectual class, he's really referring to priestly-minded people, whether he recognizes that or not, whether he uses that semantics or not. But he's saying that being born in this moment is like a neo-medieval moment because the priestly-minded people, remember, Charlemagne could not read or write. He was illiterate. And so for the intellectual class, for the poetic class, this was a time to hide away in the monastery. This was a time to almost become irrelevant. The spiritual work, the biblical work, the priestly work that was going on in the halls of scholasticism and academia at the time, early academia, the first cathedral schools, was seen as irrelevant by the rest of society, was seen as a waste of time, or as, again, it was a solitary sort of a thing. It was detached from the rest of society. So when he's talking about neo-medieval, he's talking about resetting civilization to this point where the priestly activity is disconnected with the reality of the social organism. And mercantilism rules everything. Now, I would sort of disagree with him on this point. Again, I'm coming at it from more of a tripartite class analysis. He's not really using that language, and so there are bound to be contradictions and problems in trying to synthesize his ideas into mine. I have a problem, of course, with his critique of, or his concept that the Dark Ages, being the medieval era, and the present neo-medievalism that we're being led into is really a conflict he sees as the intellectual class versus the dumbing down of society is kind of the way that he refers to it. You remember that Idiocracy was a leftist film. Today, Idiocracy seems almost to be a right-wing film, but at that time it was a leftist film, and William Irwin Thompson is sort of in this position where you can even hear he criticizes the postmodern introduction of new genders, and so in some senses, in the current context, he's almost shifted to the right with respect to the social center of society. But at that time, the left wing was anti-capitalist, anti-corporatist, anti-consumerist, and it was against a lot of fads and fashions that the left has now embraced in its neoliberal phase. So at that time, it was still acceptable, pre-Obama, it was still acceptable to criticize neoliberalism. That's the milieu that William Irwin Thompson is operating out of, that now is more associated with some of the radical right-wing influences because the left has shed that and become solely focused on racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., transphobia, which he would have regarded as distractions from the neoliberal disintegration of society, and he critiques globalism, which you're not allowed to do on the left anymore. He critiques globalism while still saying, I'm really a part of this global international movement. So again, it's an interesting thing to go back and listen to these interviews and these lectures. But when he talks about neo-medievalism, the really important thing that I'm trying to get out of this is to say that people are putting forth this idea that there is a solution out there. When for the vast majority of human history, you just had to deal with the cards you were dealt. You were a peasant. The vast majority of people are peasants. and they have to deal with that system. Even if you're born into the aristocratic elite class, you have to deal with the system of religion. You cannot just declare yourself a pagan. You have to go along with Christianity, whether you agree or you don't agree. Exoterically, you have to agree with it. You have to go along with it. Now, esoterically, you can delve into alchemy and all kinds of weird things, the Talmud and Kabbalah, but you exoterically have to be a Christian. So everyone's born into a system, and medievalism and neo-medievalism then reinforces this point that we all understand that at certain points in the past we were born into slavery. We were born into slavery to the soil. I mean, Genesis talks about this, that man is destined to be enslaved to tilling the soil and toiling the fruit of his labor. You know, he no longer can just pick the fruit from the tree as he did in the African Garden of Eden, but now he has to venture out into the cold wilderness, to the harsh deserts, and he has to really work and toil as an agriculturalist rather than a hunter-gatherer in order to survive. So this aspect of slavery was then replaced by this myth that people like Rousseau introduced, this myth of progress, this myth of liberation, this myth of escaping need and hunger and want. Now we've entered into an age of hyperabundance where everyone's obese and overstimulated and distracted. And this distraction almost has, again, it's led to a neo-medievalism where it's no longer the case where we don't have access to books, but we don't want to read books because our attention span is too short. It's no longer that we don't have access to knowledge, but that we're too distracted by fake news. It's no longer that we don't have the ability to read and to learn or to understand, but we don't want to. We want to be entertained. We want to be distracted. So this inversion, where man has typically been oppressed by suffering, by deprivation, by lack of resources, now he's drowning in it. This is what Ebert and Commons refer to as hypermodernity, being trapped, being buried alive, being drowning. You're drowning in information. There's too much information. There are too many YouTube videos. You can't watch the right ones. You can't spend time doing things productive because you're too busy with video games and porn and fake news and that which is entertaining versus that which is useful. So this is what we're drowning in, and it is a kind of neo-medievalism because it reintroduces the idea that the individual no longer has agency, especially not political agency. The individual no longer has the ability to make an impact or change society. We're done with this idea of, you know, the Protestantism of Martin Luther and the French Revolution as the power of the mob, you know, the idea that the average person can make a difference if we all band together in a democracy. We can overthrow those higher powers, have an egalitarian society where meritocracy rules, and everyone is essentially capable of doing whatever they want, which was then extended with communism and Marxism. We're passing away from that, and we're going back to a neo-medievalism where we understand ourselves as being really more similar to those serfs and those peasants, because economically, that's where we are. It's an interesting thing where politics as a game show, politics as a Hollywood movie production, is taking the focus off economics. You hear this from the left wing and the right wing, where they say, oh, the difference between Republicans and Democrats is one wants more taxes, one wants less taxes, and that's stupid, that's irrelevant. But actually the opposite is the case. There's layers to this. So we're actually distracted by abortion, we're distracted by race, we're distracted by gender and culture and all these issues that don't actually impact, they do not impact the fundamental underlying class structure of society where we're led by mercantilism, which instantiates itself now as capitalism rather than communism, but it's still the supremacy of trade and material things and wealth and greed and resources and money. And this is all that matters. So the supremacy of economics over everything else means economics can no longer be questioned. We cannot question the supremacy of the mercantile class. We cannot imagine a society led by, you know, MMA champions or society led by priests. We can only imagine a society run by millionaires and billionaires. We're not allowed to escape that, and the only thing we're allowed to dispute is, okay, within this money-led society, are we going to have a ban on abortion? Are we going to have free abortion? Are we going to have transgender bathrooms? Are we going to have no transgender bet. We're allowed to argue on these things, even race. We're allowed to argue, are we going to be anti-racist, or are we going to be racist? Are we going to be anti-sexist, or are we going to be sexist? We're allowed to debate these issues because they do not fundamentally question the supremacy of money over our society as opposed to a warrior-led society, priestly-led society. So in a sense, economics is the most fundamental issue that we're not allowed to question. And it's not that there's a ban, it's not that they're going to kill you if you question this, but it's just that they're going to distract you with other things so that you're not worried about the economics. Oh, who cares? You're a libertarian, you're this, you're that. And I mean, it's a funny thing because it's almost correct, right? Economics doesn't matter in the sense that it's not something we can change. But on the other thing, it's really the only thing that matters because it provides all the incentives that then play out in terms of social moods and social and cultural progression, and the shift toward what we call the left wing is all driven by the fact that we have a money incentivized society rather than a warrior-led or a priestly-led society. So in a sense, economics is the most fundamental thing in our society. We can't question it, and therefore it becomes irrelevant by its supremacy. Because it is so fundamental, it's like we're swimming in this ocean of mercantilism, and we cannot escape it. We don't know what another society would look like. We can't even conceive of that because it's so dominant, it's so supremacist that we can't conceive of a world outside of it. And so we have to bicker about, cultural issues, abortion, gay marriage, things like this. And we have to redirect our attention. And so we're never thinking about jumping out of the water and maybe breathing the fresh air because we're constantly swimming in this mercantilist supremacy, and we're fighting over these little cultural issues that are really insignificant, and really redirecting our attention away from the mercantilist system and toward these issues within the system that are ultimately themselves futile because you're attacking. It's almost like we're living under the shade of a tree and the apples are falling down and hitting us on the head, and so we're beating the apples, we're slicing the apples up, we're eating the apples, we're mutilating the apples. We're focusing all of our attention on the apples in the hopes that this is going to change the overall system, and yet we still live under the shade of the tree. The tree is this almost a world tree, right? Going back to ancient mythology, there's a world tree that hangs over us that controls everything, the structure from the roots down up through the branches and the leaves, that controls everything, and we're focused on the fruit and the apples and the results of what's going on. So that's the way in which economics is the most fundamental issue, but it's also an irrelevant issue because we can't change it. So that's my position. You can call that pessimistic, you can call it whatever. I think the term neo-medieval gets to the heart of what we're talking about, this situation that we're in. If someone can defy that and prove me wrong, okay, but I think ultimately if we accept that we're living in a neo-medieval stage, then the smart thing to do and the moral thing to do is not to fight futilely in a gladiatorial match. And I think that's actually humiliating. I think we live in a world that's telling you should be part of Antifa, you should be part of the alt-right, you should be this, you should be that, you should be politically involved. And I'm saying no, I'm rejecting all of that. That's my solution, is to not be fooled, not to be a chump, and not to be part of the circus. I don't want to be part of the circus of politics. Now, I talk about politics because I want to increase people's disillusionment. I want to blow away that miasma with the winds of truth, and I want to clear the scene with formalism and have people understand things. But my next step is not to say, okay, now that we understand politics, now we can impact it. No. What I'm saying is the more we talk about politics, the more we truly understand politics through a formalist analysis, the better we can actually divest ourselves of all this tomfoolery and silliness and monkey business of politics, which is a distraction, which is a Hollywood movie. People who participate in politics are the same people, or it's the same mentality as people who are really concerned with the new Marvel movie or a new video game or these sorts of things. So it's like, yes, we're going to engage with this culture. We're a part of it. I don't live out in the woods. You don't live out in the woods. So obviously we're going to engage with pop culture. We're going to be distracted. We're going to watch entertainment or whatever. And I'm not standing here as some kind of Puritan or an ascetic who has divested himself of all distractions, and neither have you. I mean, maybe some people can say that they've done this. although maybe they've done it in a sense of by dropping out of society and living in the woods, and at that point they've disconnected from the social organism, and they're no longer trying to reach out and help other people and form connections with other people, but they're just rejecting society. In a sense, it's a form of suicide because we are a social organism, we're not just individuals. By disconnecting from society, you are committing a type of a suicide. So I don't embrace that. I don't suggest that. I don't put that forth again as a solution. My solution is to say that the problem as it's framed is a false problem. We can no more fight capitalism than a medieval peasant could fight God or the church. It's just not possible. You can lash out in a terrorist attack, you can be a heretic, you can be a witch. You're just going to get burned. You're just going to get burned. That's not a productive exercise. Now, maybe to esoterically involve yourself with that might be useful, but to exoterically, in an activist situation, try to convert people, oh, you need to be a libertarian, you need to be Antifa, you need to be alt-right, you need to be any of these things, and then to say that you need to destroy your life, you need to sacrifice yourself for a political actor like Trump. I mean, people have literally, relationships that have been destroyed. Some really bad things have happened over this question of Trump. And then people want to take that further to say, no, Trump isn't radical enough. We need to destroy ourselves for Matt Heimbach. We need to destroy ourselves for Jeff Scope. We need to destroy our lives for Antifa. There are Antifa members out there who are really going in a bad downward spiral with drugs and polyamory and all kinds of things that are really self-destructive because they're true believers that Antifa is going to save the world and solve these problems of sexism and racism. I'm saying there are unsolvable problems. So when you ask me, okay, we have a problem, what's the solution? Well, sometimes there is no solution. And sometimes we have to accept that there are things we can't change. We are not gods. We are not Nietzsche and Ubermensch. And we need to reconcile ourselves to that. So that is a kind of neo-medievalism, respecting and understanding the authority of the powers that be, which I think is conducive with and is parallel to the project that's going on with formalism. So I'm not against the formalists, and I think their perceptual work is really good, their analysis is really good, but what I'm saying is I'm sitting back and I'm saying I don't believe, until Bill Gates calls me up on the phone with a conference call with George Soros and they say, look, we've been watching your YouTube videos, you're a real smart guy, what is the solution to the problems? Then I might start spending my time thinking about that. But I'm not in that position. If you are in that position where you're getting these calls from Gates and Soros, then I guess you're well within your rights to have political theories. But other than that, the only reason to talk about politics, the only reason I talk about politics, is really to divest myself and others from politics so that we can redirect our attention toward things that are more important by understanding the emptiness of politics, the hollow, shallow entertainment of politics, the Americanism of politics. By understanding that through formalist analysis and divesting ourselves of it, we can redirect attention toward things we can actually change. We can actually change ourselves. If we're obese, we can recognize that as a mental illness, and we can fundamentally understand ourselves better and attempt to change. Whatever problems we have, I think that, again, the statistics out there, 75% of people who are eligible for military service are not actually fit for military service. And that's not just physical obesity, but it's also mental problems, mental issues, inability to hold down a job, inability to form personal relationships. Raise your hand if you do not have friends, if you don't have close friends. And I'm not saying this even as a function of my particular audience. I know I can be harsh, I know I can be critical here, but I think the soulful path is to break yourself down, break the situation down to its most desperate elements, not to hide away from that which is uncomfortable, that which is negative, but to really embrace it. And that is the gothic, emo tendency to tend toward the darkness, to seek out the darkness. Not as a Satanist loving darkness, but just recognizing there is tragedy in life, not hiding from that, and really trying to understand it and understand its source. And sometimes you have to wallow in it. Sometimes you do have to be depressed. Sometimes you really have to situate yourself in the mess and to really dive deep into this ocean that we're swimming in, and really confront it and not delude yourself about it. And once you've done that work, then you can assess where you are. Okay, what do I actually have agency in? What do I actually have control over? because there are things in this world other than politics. There's spirituality, there's art. We really can create art. We really can create beautiful things. And to get back to my point about friends, when we look at studies and we ask young men, especially young white men, we ask them, do you have someone in your life who you can talk to about anything? And increasingly they're saying no. And this is a change. This is not, oh, boys will be boys. Men just are not sensitive. Men are not open. Men are not willing to talk about their problems. This is not an age-old phenomenon. This is a new relative change. I mean, again, maybe overall you can say that women are more emotional, women are more open. When women have a problem, they cry about it. When women have a problem, they talk to their best friend about it. But specifically, we're seeing a trend where young white men, especially, but Western men in general, I think, there are all kinds of Americans of all races that are impacted by this. There is a progression where young white men are increasingly saying, I don't have any friends. I don't have any close friends. I don't have men I'm intimate with it. And this question of intimacy, it's become sexualized, and I talk about this in relation to a lot of fetishes that people have. Trying to understand, doing some Freudian analysis. Where does this come from? What is this an expression of? What is this a symptom of? I don't think it's a cause. I think it's a symptom. Why are people so getting, why is this happening? Why are people wrapped up in this idea, this synonymity, this equivocation between sexuality and intimacy? Because we don't have a space for platonic intimacy. We don't have a space for friendship. We don't have a space for relationships and connections. So we can say that the culture as a whole is driving people apart, driving people into alienation. We can't change politics. We can't change economics. We can't change these things. Again, maybe you think you're the exception. You're just so smart. You're so powerful. You're so well connected. You're such a genius. You're such a Nietzschean Übermensch that you can change the political system even though no one else can. Okay, well, I reject that, and I say that we don't have agency over that. We're in a neo-medievalism. We don't have the potentiality to affect that. So what do we have the potentiality to affect? What should we do with this limited, short, mortal life that we have? And my answer would be, we need to look internally and look at our own problems. I think chief among these is relationship problems, connection problems, intimacy problems. How many people are from divorced families? Raise your hand. This is a rhetorical question I'm putting forth to connect this to people personally in the audience, because statistically, this is just true. Statistically, we're moving toward more brokenness of families. Families are breaking apart. The structures that we had are breaking apart. The tribal bonds that we had are breaking apart. Identity is breaking apart. We are being more and more alienated. Credit to Joel Davis for recognizing this. Credit to Justin Murphy for talking about this. Who's on the left. Credit to all those leftists prior to the rise of Obama, who basically killed the anti-neoliberal element among the left wing. Or even, we're seeing it with Bernie, where Bernie was like, I'm against neoliberalism, and now he's sort of fallen in line in a very sad way. So we're seeing the left being subjugated to neoliberalism, and some people are speaking out against that. And I don't have a hope for a political solution. What I have hope for, or the only thing we can do, because I guess I agree with people on the left and the right, especially the right-wingers who are saying, well, we have a solution and maybe we're wrong, but at least we're trying. What are you doing? You're just criticizing us. You're not putting forth a solution. My solution is, there is no political solution, but there are things we can do in our own personal lives. We can rethink how we act, how we behave, how we relate to reality and other people. We can rethink and deconstruct our own solipsism. We can look at things like generative anthropology and philosophy and understand and situate this Faustian concept of the individual and see where it's taken us with technology, which it has created. Not the other way around. It's not that technology has created alienation, but that Faustian individualism and the myth of Marduk slaying Tiamat, that myth gave rise to technology, which then furthered alienation in a kind of double helix structure, where one feeds into the other feeds into the other, and they spiral upwards. And questioning that and deconstructing that and realizing, we're collective, actually. We're part of an organism. We're part of a Chthonian mass. Then we sort of see, and we prove to ourselves the value of relationships and intimacy with other people. and we start to see the structures in ourselves, whatever it is, solipsism, narcissism, individualism. We see the things that are holding us back. We see the things that are disconnecting us from other people. And we do have this choice to reach out to others and to connect with them. And that, to me, is what making YouTube videos is about. Through this hyper-modern context, I'm not going to, I guess I could go live in the woods, and then every night I could sneak out and, throw you in a boat and kidnap you and drag you back and, duct tape your mouth, tie you up, and give you a lecture. But ultimately, if you force people, especially in this context, if I try to force people to listen to me, at the end of the day, once the duct tape comes off and I untie their hands and I say, okay, I've given you the knowledge, what are you going to do now? They're going to go back to civilization. In fact, they're going to view me as a negative thing if I try to force people, because I don't actually have power. I don't have the power to force you to do what I want. I can only make suggestions. I can only put out these energies and make suggestions that people change their lives. And if people choose to, actually take that to heart and say, maybe he's got a point, and maybe he does ramble, and the videos are not structured, and they're not scripted, they're not prepared, they're not any of that. But if you can suffer through that, and you can find a few gems here and there, and you can say, well, I disagree with 99% of what he's saying, but there's this one thing that he said that was interesting, then that's my attempt at reaching out to people, reaching out to an audience who are hungry for this. Again, we're situated in a world where your parents are not your biological parents. Your parents are the school system. And we're no longer integrated on that biological level. That family structure has fallen away. It's been dissected. And, some people can say, well, I'm the exception to that. Actually, everything's great in my family. I love that family life. Like, everyone's at different levels. The Amish still exist. I'm not saying they don't exist. But they exist as, vestigial is the word. They exist as a vestigial organism within a broader society. And they don't actually exist. The brain of our society, the consciousness, the mindset of our society is headed toward the problems I'm talking about. So, of course, there are vestigial good things going on that we can all say, oh, good for you. That's wonderful. But I don't want to just congratulate those people and say, yeah, you have a solution, because that's not a solution. The Amish are not a solution to the problem. The Amish are a vestigial, almost like you've just eaten a great big meal and then you burp a little bit and you taste that good meal again. But that's not real, right? The Amish don't actually have a system capable of challenging the status quo. They don't have a system of challenging the direction of technology. They exist with the permission of the status quo. They exist so long as the status quo allows them to exist. So that's not a genuine alternative. Again, that is a kind of distraction. That is a kind of ignoring the problem of what's actually going on. So I don't go back to traditionalism. I don't go back to conservatism. I don't try to harken back to an earlier age. I participate in the culture as it is here and now in this hyper-modern reality of things like YouTube and whatever's beyond YouTube. I'm sure something will come beyond it. YouTube's only been around for, as a popular medium, only really 10 years. And so in the next 10 years, it might disappear entirely and we'll have something completely new. I don't know what that will be, but that's kind of what I'm participating with, because I think that's where the people are hurting the most. They're not hurting the most in the Amish community or the Mormon community or the Orthodox Jewish community or these communities which isolate themselves from the effects of hypermodernity. It's the people who are lost and disconnected and don't have any kind of connection to anyone. They don't have any anchoring or identity, and that's why they are attracted to extremism, because extremism replaces reality with stimulation in the same way that, real sex is, it's two people and they're kind of rubbing sex organs together, and it's not if you videotape two people having sex, it's not really a very explicit thing in reality. It's almost like compare nude portraits in the Renaissance or Greek sculpture. It's not erotic. It's not stimulating. It's beautiful, maybe, but it's not stimulating. It's not this hyper reality. And that is what extremism does. Extremism takes something that you want and that you need. So we might say that candy is a form of food extremism because candy is not real food. It's synthesized in a laboratory, and it's fed to you, and it has all these important elements of real food. So it has sugars, and it has calories, and it has this tastiness, and they might even put some citrus in there, some simulated fake citrus taste. Say, ooh, the brain is tricked into thinking, oh, this is not just food, this is like superfood. Same with porn. Porn is not just sex, it's super sex. And this is what extremism is in the political field. So people are totally disconnected from family, institution, identity, all these things that help socialize us and help bring intimacy into our lives. They tend toward Antifa and alt-right because it's not like, oh, we're a political ideology, we're a super political ideology. And so that simulation and stimulation are the two words I'm interchangeably using. They help reach out and punch you in the face through the computer screen. So you might never interact with these groups in the real life, but then all of a sudden they reach out and they just grab you by the throat and shake you, and you feel alive again. There's so much deathly numb depression going on that to be struck with something like Antifa, to be struck with something like the alt-right, really, it's invigorating. It's a false invigoration. It's like putting an electrical current through a dead body in a way. But it is stimulating, and so people are attracted to that, and then they're willing to throw their lives away for that because they had nothing to live for in the beginning. They started from zero, nothingness, death, and then they felt this spark of stimulation, and then they're willing to throw their lives away for that. But what I'm saying is, let's be careful about getting involved with politics, and let's see that having real relationships with real people is a problem for it's a statistically growing problem. It's a problem for what I project. I'm putting out random videos on YouTube. I'm not promoting them with ads. I'm not going on every show I'm being offered to go on. I'm not trying to gain a vast audience here. I'm just sort of in this, I don't know, I'm putting out a signal, and I'm just seeing who magically, mystically, the YouTube algorithm just brings to my videos. And maybe some people spread my videos, I can't prevent people from doing that, but it's almost a very, go with the flow, go with the current, and what you could call a feminine rather than a masculine wants to just pound his ideology into the face of every man, woman, and child and force everyone to believe and argue and argue. I'm just sort of letting it happen. I'm just sort of putting my thoughts out there, and I'm seeing who happens to actually sit through an hour of my content, or 20 hours, or 400 hours, how many hours I've made. Who actually decides to sit through all of that and then leave a negative comment about how badly structured my videos are. It's a very interesting phenomenon to me, and I'm trying to understand it experientially. I'm trying to understand the world through this platform. That's the process. I'm trying to see what problems are out there, who is out there looking for something. There are people who are distracted, who are already fulfilled in a sense, they're already embedded within the system. They're not interested in my videos. I'm not trying to force my videos on anybody. I'm not trying to use tricks necessarily. I mean, maybe I'll put in a funny title here and there. But that's not really the point, is to well, maybe if I get a critical mass of people following me, then all of a sudden we can change the world. That's not what I'm talking about. It is a neo-medievalism. It is an acceptance of the power structure. And it is saying that, I don't think not everyone's going to be satisfied, as Thompson, not everyone is going to be satisfied just stewing in this cauldron of pop culture muck. And some people are going to want to get out of that. And the first stop they usually make is into political extremism. And I'm talking about politics to say, hey, maybe it's time to go to another level with this. maybe the solution obviously is not to be found in pop culture, and it's also not to be found in political extremism, but maybe it's to understand the fundamental psychological process of what's going on in history. We're looking at ourselves as part of humanity. So when we are not just looking at our own lives, you know, the Freudian or Stefan Molyneux will say, how's your relationship with your parents? And of course everyone has, you know, some people have great relationships, other people just have terrible relationships with their parents. And even people who have great relationships, you know, their parents are flawed in many ways, and so even if it's a good relationship, so to speak, can be a codependent, self-destructive relationship where the parents are advocating for really bad behavior and the kids are okay with that, and they're all engaging in a kind of really, really bad ideas. So, you know, the quote-unquote cool mom, you know, you have a young girl and she's like, oh, my mom's so cool, she lets me smoke and drink and do all these things, and it's like, you know, you say you have a great relationship with your mom, but is that a healthy relationship? That's a different question. Healthy relationships versus good relationships. So I don't know, some people might have the best of both worlds, and a lot of people don't. And we have to question, what can we do with our limited agency? Our agency is not unlimited. That's the point. That's the thing that people aren't willing to accept. Agency is not unlimited. We have to truly analyze who we are, where we're at. Some people have greater aspirations. They think they're going to take over the world. I think a lot of them are delusional. You're all welcome to prove me wrong and prove that you're really going to change things in a fundamental way. But again, I'm not looking at myself as an individual saying, well, I have my own problems. This is the anti-hero. This is the person who believes that their problems are unique to them, and that it's a Faustian idea of the self, of the individual. I'm rejecting that. I'm saying that our identity is humanity. We have to look at the history of humanity to understand ourselves. We are just one instantiation of humanity. We're just a part of humanity. So we're situating ourselves within that. We're saying, well, we can't really change. We're like one cell in an organism. One skin cell on my body does not have the ability to change my consciousness. It just has to go along for the ride. And it has to do as well as it can within, I mean, think about that. The skin cell, it grows, it lives, and it dies. And during that time, it can mutate into a cancer cell and bring down the whole thing, or it can do its best with what it has. So that's kind of how I'm situating the individual, is I'm saying the individual is really limited in its agency, but we still have birth and life and death. We still have to deal with those three things. As long as we're living, we're going to be confronted with those problems. So when I say I don't have a solution to politics because there is no solution to politics, I'm not saying let's all, you know, exit the stage of life. What I'm saying is there are still very important things that we can talk about and we can question. And so talking about politics for me is about working toward a community where we're no longer distracted by the entertainment and the games of politics. We recognize it for what it is. We recognize it as a greater force than ourselves. It's kind of going back to a hunter-gatherer mentality where you understand it's like, dude, Thor controls the crops. Like, crops might live, they might die. That's up to Thor. We just have to pray to Thor and hope everything goes all right. But we're not Thor. We can't contest Thor. We can't fight with Thor. We can sort of appeal to Thor, maybe. We can offer sacrifices to Thor. We don't have dominance over that. We don't have agency over the weather. That's Thor's domain. So it's almost going back to that polytheism of being like, look, we live in a world that's dominated by these gods, and we don't have control over them. We don't have control over politics. We can't impact politics. We can kind of pray to Trump in hopes that he doesn't ban free speech. We can kind of pray and hope that we don't get, put in concentration camps or have mass incarceration or, be unduly prosecuted for thought crimes and things like this. We can hope and pray, and we can offer propitiation, and we can offer sacrifices and whatever. But at the end of the day, we don't have agency in that area. But we do have agency in how, we honor those around us, how we honor ourselves, and the way that we live our life. So we can live our lives. The way that we live our lives is ultimately, that's something we do have authority over. And so that's really the most important question we can ask. And coming up with solutions to those problems is a lot more interesting to me at this point than, quote unquote, coming up with solutions to political problems, because that's just not my domain, and I want people to exit from that. I think because I've seen people get engaged with that, and I've seen the I don't think people realize. I think if people are honest with themselves, they'll see you're using this warrior tactics, this warrior mindset to a game that's not for warriors, it's for merchants, and you're fooling yourself. And it's not just, we talk about these three classes in relation to each other, and the idea that you can have three classes doing three different things. Are we getting more stuff going on here? We're probably getting more stuff. I don't really care. I think that on this note, whatever you would call this note, this unsatisfying note, is as decent a place as any to end the video. What is the solution to politics? There is no solution. So we need to look toward other problems. We need to look toward, how can we be good artists? How can we be good friends? How can we construct community? These are important questions. So that's all. See you next time.